Hello everyone, and welcome to my BNB CBS Gossip 24 channel. Hope's world implodes in a single breath the moment the truth begins to surface, because what started as a whispered plea, "Please don't tell anyone," rapidly transforms into a storm of exposed lies, shattered trust, and a secret so massive it threatens to destroy every relationship she holds sacred. And as Hope stands trembling in the shadow of her own guilt, her hands unconsciously drifting to her stomach, the weight of her pregnancy presses down on her with suffocating force, not just because she is carrying new life, but because that life is the undeniable evidence of a past she has desperately tried to bury, a past that links her irrevocably to Deke, whose dark secret now coils around her future like a venomous snake ready to strike. The terror in Hope's eyes isn't just fear of judgment, it's the realization that once the truth escapes, there will be no rewinding time, no softening the blow, no way to protect Thomas from the devastation that's coming, and yet she still finds herself clinging to him, her voice breaking as she begs him to stay silent, to give her time, to let her figure out how to survive what's unfolding, even as the question hangs in the air like a loaded weapon: who is the father? A question Thomas never wanted to ask but can no longer avoid, because the pieces don't add up, the timelines don't align, and the look on Hope's face tells him more than words ever could. And as his confusion curdles into suspicion, then betrayal, the truth crashes over him with merciless clarity, shattering the fragile illusion he's been holding on to, because the woman he trusted, the woman he believed in, has been carrying not only his heart but a lie big enough to rupture everything they built together. Hope cries, not the quiet tears of sadness, but the raw, broken sobs of someone cornered by their own choices, someone who knows that love doesn't survive secrets like this. And when Thomas finally learns the truth, not just about the pregnancy, but about Deke's role in it, about the moments Hope tried to convince herself didn't matter, didn't define her, his silence is more devastating than anger, because it's the silence of a man recalculating his entire reality, wondering if any of it was real, while Hope watches him slip further away with every heartbeat. Meanwhile, Deke's terrible secret claws its way into the open, exposing a darkness Hope never fully acknowledged, a web of manipulation, vulnerability, and reckless desire that led to consequences neither of them were prepared to face. And as whispers turn into accusations and chaos ripples outward, Hope's pregnancy becomes the epicenter of total emotional collapse, sparking confrontations, ultimatums, and moral reckonings that force every character involved to choose sides, question loyalties, and confront the uncomfortable truth that sometimes love doesn't save you, it condemns you. Hope is torn between protecting the child growing inside her and owning the reality of how that child came to be, between the instinct to shield Thomas from pain and the knowledge that lies only deepen wounds. And as Deke's name becomes synonymous with scandal and betrayal, Hope realizes too late that secrets don't stay buried, they fester, they rot, and they eventually explode, leaving nothing untouched. And as she stands alone in the aftermath, tears streaking her face, hands shaking, heart pounding with dread and regret, one truth becomes inescapable: this secret was never hers to keep, this truth was always too big to hide, and now that it's out, nothing will ever be the same again. The moment after the truth comes out is not explosive but eerily still, as if the universe itself pauses to absorb the damage, and in that silence Hope feels the full magnitude of what she has unleashed, because Thomas doesn't shout, doesn't accuse, doesn't demand explanations the way she braced herself for. Instead he simply looks at her with an expression so hollow it steals the air from her lungs, and she realizes in that instant that this is worse than anger, worse than fury, because silence means detachment. It means he is already slipping into a place she can't reach, a place where trust has been irreparably fractured. And as Hope tries to speak, tries to fill the void with apologies and fragmented confessions, the words collapse under their own weight, tumbling out disorganized and desperate, each sentence revealing just how long she's been living inside this lie, how many moments she replayed in her head trying to convince herself that the truth could stay hidden forever, that the past could remain sealed off from the present. But now that illusion disintegrates completely, and Thomas finally exhales, a sharp, humorless breath, asking the question that slices through everything: how long has she known? How long has she been carrying this secret while letting him plan a future that was already poisoned at its core? And Hope breaks again, because she doesn't have a clean answer. Only a blur of fear and denial and self-deception, only the knowledge that from the second she suspected she was pregnant, her life stopped being her own, every choice shaped by panic, every smile forced, every moment with Thomas shadowed by guilt she pretended wasn't there. As the weight of the pregnancy settles into the center of every conversation, it becomes impossible to separate the baby from the betrayal, and Hope can feel people's perceptions shifting in real time, their sympathy tangling uncomfortably with judgment, because pregnancy in this moment isn't a symbol of hope or renewal, it's evidence, it's consequence. It's a ticking clock that refuses to let anyone move on without answers, and Thomas, struggling to reconcile his love for Hope with the reality of what she's done, begins to pull away not just emotionally but physically, putting distance between them as though proximity itself might contaminate him with the lie, and Hope notices every inch of that distance, every step back, every averted gaze, knowing she deserves it yet still aching under the loss, because despite everything, her feelings for Thomas are real, painfully real, and that makes the situation even more unbearable, because she hasn't just betrayed him, she's destroyed the one place she felt safe. Meanwhile, Deke becomes a ghost and a lightning rod all at once, his name echoing through every whispered conversation, every tense confrontation, because his secret doesn't just implicate him in Hope's pregnancy, it exposes a side of him people either ignored or refused to see, and as fragments of his behavior surface, the manipulation, the emotional pressure, the moments he blurred lines when Hope was vulnerable, the narrative around him shifts dramatically, and he finds himself isolated, defensive, and increasingly desperate to control the damage, insisting he never meant for things to go this far, that he never intended to hurt anyone, but his words ring hollow against the undeniable reality that his actions set this chain reaction into motion, and Hope, torn between guilt and anger, begins to see him differently too, no longer through the haze of confusion and emotional entanglement, but with clarity sharpened by consequences, and that clarity terrifies her, because it forces her to confront the uncomfortable truth that she didn't just fall into this situation, she was led, nudged, influenced at a moment when she was already breaking. As pressure mounts, the question of paternity becomes unavoidable, and the uncertainty gnaws at everyone involved, because without answers, no one knows where they stand, and Hope feels trapped in the center of a storm of expectations, people demanding honesty, demanding accountability, demanding she decide what kind of future she's going to fight for, while she herself feels like she's barely holding together, her emotions swinging violently between shame, fear, protectiveness, and a fragile, stubborn resolve to survive for the sake of the child growing inside her, and in quieter moments, when the chaos fades into a dull hum, she places her hand over her stomach and wonders how something so small can carry such enormous consequences, wondering what kind of world this baby will be born into, and whether forgiveness is even possible when the foundation has cracked this deeply. Thomas, meanwhile, wrestles with his own unraveling, because betrayal forces him to re-evaluate not only Hope but himself, questioning his judgment, his instincts, his role in missing the signs, and the anger he suppresses begins to manifest in sharp words and cold boundaries, as he tries to protect himself from further pain, yet even as he pulls away, memories resurface unbidden, moments of genuine intimacy, laughter, shared dreams, and they clash violently with the present reality, leaving him emotionally exhausted and unsure whether walking away will truly free him or haunt him forever, and when he finally confronts Deke directly, the tension is explosive, charged with everything left unsaid, because this isn't just about a pregnancy, it's about respect, boundaries, and a line that should never have been crossed, and though no fists are thrown, the confrontation leaves scars just the same, raw words landing like blows, stripping away any remaining pretense of innocence. The wider fallout continues to spread, because secrets never exist in isolation, and as more people become aware of what's happened, alliances shift, opinions harden, and Hope finds herself both defended and condemned in equal measure, some viewing her as a victim of circumstance and manipulation, others seeing her as the architect of her own destruction, and navigating those judgments becomes another burden she didn't anticipate, forcing her to develop a thicker skin even as her emotional reserves are nearly depleted. And in moments of solitude, she wonders whether redemption is something she can earn or something she's already forfeited, wondering whether telling the truth sooner would have changed anything, or whether this outcome was inevitable the moment she chose silence over honesty. As the reality of impending motherhood settles in, practical decisions loom, medical appointments, plans, choices that can't be postponed, and each one underscores how permanent this situation is, how there will be no clean break, no simple resolution, and Hope begins to understand that the story doesn't end with the secret coming out, it begins there. Because living with the truth is far more complex than hiding it ever was, and every step forward will require confronting pain she once avoided, owning mistakes without letting them define her entirely, and finding strength in a place she didn't know existed. And though fear still dominates her thoughts, something else starts to emerge beneath it, a quiet determination, fragile but real, to face whatever comes next without lies, without running, even if that means standing alone. By the time the chaos settles into a tense, uncertain calm, nothing resembles the life Hope once imagined, and yet the story remains unfinished, suspended between regret and possibility, because while trust has been broken and relationships reshaped, the future remains unwritten. And as Hope looks ahead, aware that forgiveness may never come from everyone she hurt, she clings to the belief that truth, once revealed, is the first step towards something new, even if that something is born from loss, even if it comes at a cost she's still paying. And in that fragile space between devastation and resolve, she prepares herself for whatever revelations are still to come, knowing that some secrets change everything, but surviving them changes you too. The uneasy calm that follows the initial fallout is deceptive, because beneath the surface everything is still shifting, still cracking, still threatening to collapse again at the slightest pressure, and Hope feels it every time she wakes in the middle of the night with her heart racing, her thoughts spiraling through worst-case scenarios she can't silence, because now that the truth is out, there is no refuge left in denial, no comfort in pretending things might simply return to the way they were. And as the days stretch on, she becomes acutely aware of how exposed she is, how every interaction feels weighted, scrutinized, and fragile, as if one wrong word could ignite another explosion. Thomas maintains a careful distance, not cruelly, not deliberately, but with a guarded restraint that cuts Hope deeper than outright rejection ever could, because it tells her he is still deciding whether he can exist in the same emotional space as her without breaking apart, and that uncertainty gnaws at her relentlessly, making every moment feel provisional, like she is living on borrowed time in a life that no longer belongs to her. Deke, meanwhile, refuses to fade quietly into the background, and his presence becomes increasingly disruptive, because he is unwilling to accept the role of villain without a fight, insisting on conversations Hope isn't ready to have, pushing for acknowledgement, for clarity, for reassurance that he hasn't been completely erased from the narrative. And each interaction leaves Hope shaken, torn between resentment and responsibility, because no matter how angry she is at him, she can't deny that their connection exists, etched into reality by the pregnancy itself, and that realization forces her to confront an uncomfortable truth, that avoiding Deke won't make him disappear, and ignoring the past won't protect the future. Yet every time he speaks, every time he tries to frame what happened as mutual, as inevitable, Hope feels a surge of defensiveness, because she knows how vulnerable she was, how fractured she felt, and how easily that vulnerability was exploited, whether intentionally or not, and the lack of accountability in his tone only deepens the divide between them. As the question of paternity becomes impossible to postpone, the emotional stakes rise sharply, because answers promise clarity but also finality, and Hope finds herself paralyzed by the fear of knowing. Because once the truth is confirmed, there will be no room left for ambiguity, no space for Hope to reshape the outcome, and Thomas makes it clear, quietly but firmly, that he cannot move forward without certainty, that continuing in limbo is slowly tearing him apart, and hearing that fractures Hope anew, because she understands his need for answers even as she dreads what those answers might do to him, to her, to everything that remains between them. The decision to proceed with testing feels less like a choice and more like a surrender, an acknowledgement that the story is no longer hers to control, and in the days leading up to it, anxiety consumes her, manifesting in sleepless nights, restless pacing, and moments of sudden, overwhelming emotion that leave her breathless and shaking. During this time, Hope begins to feel the subtle but unmistakable shift within herself, as if the ordeal is forcing her to grow in directions she never intended, never wanted, and though fear still dominates her thoughts, it is joined by an emerging sense of resolve, a determination to protect the child at the center of this chaos no matter what the outcome may be, and that instinct surprises her with its strength, because even as everything else feels unstable, that sense of purpose anchors her, reminding her that she is not just reacting to circumstances anymore, she is becoming someone who must make deliberate choices, someone who can no longer afford indecision or avoidance, and this realization is both empowering and terrifying, because it means stepping fully into responsibility without the comfort of certainty. Thomas, grappling with his own internal conflict, begins to open up to those closest to him, revealing the depth of his confusion and hurt, and in doing so, he is forced to confront the fact that his anger is intertwined with grief for the future he believed he was building, grief for the trust he assumed was unshakable, and as he processes these emotions, he starts to understand that walking away might not bring the closure he seeks, that unresolved feelings have a way of lingering, of resurfacing when least expected, and this awareness complicates his decision-making, leaving him torn between self-preservation and the lingering pull of love he hasn't fully extinguished. His interactions with Hope become more nuanced, less guarded, yet still cautious, and while these moments offer a glimmer of hope, they also heighten the tension, because neither of them knows whether this fragile connection can withstand the truth that is still coming. When the results finally arrive, the moment is surreal in its quiet intensity, time seeming to slow as Hope stares at the confirmation that will reshape her life yet again, and the reality of it settles heavily in her chest, because the answer doesn't bring relief so much as clarity tinged with loss, and regardless of the outcome, something precious is gone forever, the illusion that things could have been simpler, that love alone could override consequence, and sharing the results with Thomas feels like stepping off a cliff, because she knows this information will either sever their bond completely or redefine it in ways neither of them can predict, and when she finally tells him, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands, she braces herself for the reaction that will follow. Thomas listens without interruption, his expression unreadable, and in that silence Hope prepares for rejection, for anger, for the finality she's been dreading, but what she receives instead is something far more complex, a mix of sorrow, resignation, and reluctant acceptance, because while the truth hurts, it also frees him from uncertainty, and that clarity allows him to see the situation for what it is rather than what he feared it might be, and though it doesn't erase the betrayal, it gives him a foundation from which to make a decision that feels honest rather than reactive. The conversation that follows is raw and unfiltered, filled with difficult admissions, acknowledgments of pain, and the understanding that forgiveness, if it comes at all, will be a process rather than a moment, and as they part ways that day, there is no dramatic resolution, no sweeping declaration, only the quiet recognition that whatever comes next will require time, patience, and a willingness to sit with discomfort. For Hope, the aftermath is both devastating and oddly clarifying, because while she mourns the version of her life that has slipped out of reach, she also feels a strange sense of grounding, as if the worst has already happened and survival is no longer theoretical but real, and she begins to focus on what she can control, her health, her choices, her honesty moving forward, and though the path ahead is uncertain, it no longer feels entirely unmanageable, and in moments of solitude, she reflects on how secrecy once felt like protection but ultimately became a prison, and how truth, though painful, has opened the possibility of rebuilding on a foundation that isn't cracked by deception. As relationships around her continue to adjust, some strengthening through shared vulnerability and others fading under the weight of what's been revealed, Hope learns that not everyone will understand her decisions or forgive her mistakes, and that learning to live with that reality is part of her growth, and though the future remains fraught with challenges, co-parenting complexities, emotional healing, lingering resentment, she begins to imagine a life defined not solely by this crisis but by the resilience it has awakened in her, and as she looks ahead, aware that the story is far from over, she carries with her a hard-won understanding that secrets may shape the beginning of a narrative, but it is how one lives after the truth that determines its meaning, and with that understanding, she steps forward into an uncertain future, no longer hiding, no longer running, prepared at last to face whatever comes next. In the days that follow, life does not settle so much as it rearranges itself into a shape that Hope barely recognizes, and yet she moves through it with a steadiness that surprises even her, because while the pain remains sharp, it is no longer paralyzing, and that distinction changes everything. She begins to notice small, quiet moments that ground her, the rhythm of her breath during a doctor's visit, the unexpected calm that washes over her when she hears the steady reassurance of a heartbeat, the way her body seems to remind her, again and again, that something real and undeniable is happening no matter how complicated the circumstances may be, and those moments become anchors, pulling her back from spiraling into regret every time her thoughts drift toward what she lost rather than what still exists. Thomas continues to exist at the edges of her life, not fully gone, not fully present, and that in-between space becomes its own kind of emotional terrain, one that requires careful navigation, because every interaction carries the weight of history and the uncertainty of what's still unresolved, and yet there is also a surprising gentleness between them now, a mutual acknowledgement that while trust has been damaged, cruelty would only deepen the wounds they are both trying to heal, and in fleeting exchanges, a shared look, a quiet check-in, Hope senses that while their relationship may never return to what it was, it is not entirely beyond recognition either, and that ambiguity, while painful, feels more honest than false certainty ever did. Deke, faced with the irreversible reality of the situation, is forced to confront the limits of his influence, and though tension remains, Hope draws firmer boundaries, no longer willing to absorb responsibility that isn't hers to carry, and asserting those boundaries marks a turning point, because for the first time since everything unraveled, she feels a sense of agency returning, a reminder that while she cannot rewrite the past, she can define how she moves forward, and that realization reshapes her interactions, lending her voice a quiet authority that was once absent, born not from confidence but from necessity. As weeks pass, the chaos that once dominated every thought recedes slightly, replaced by a more subdued, persistent awareness of change, and Hope learns that healing does not announce itself loudly, it unfolds gradually, in moments of choice rather than grand gestures, and though the scars remain visible, they no longer dictate every step she takes, and in accepting that some relationships will never fully recover while others may evolve into something unexpected, she begins to let go of the need for perfect resolution, understanding that closure is not always a single moment but a series of small decisions to keep moving forward despite uncertainty. Standing at the threshold of a future she never planned, Hope feels the weight of responsibility settle more comfortably on her shoulders, not because it has become lighter, but because she has grown stronger beneath it, and as she looks ahead, she no longer sees only the wreckage of what was lost, but the possibility of rebuilding something real, something honest, even if it is imperfect, and with that understanding, she takes another step forward, carrying with her the knowledge that while secrets once defined her story, truth, difficult, painful, and transformative, will define everything that comes next.